All right, welcome back, everybody. This is part two of Module 61. Today, or in this video, we're going to talk about a little bit about test construction, so things about what are some factors that make for a good test. Last video, we were kind of wrapping up. We were talking about the Flynn effect, how intelligence is technically increasing, or it had been increasing up until recently. I just wanted to show you this. This is a little bit of a review from Unit 2, looking at how IQ scores are normed, so how we determine like what is an average score, what is an above average score. And so you might remember this again from Unit 2, how like with standard deviation, intelligence is one of those factors that tend to be normally distributed, which is like a fancy term for it's on a bell curve, meaning it's shaped like this. So you have, in the middle, you've got the mean, median, mode. They're all pretty much the same. So the average score, average IQ score is 100, and the standard deviation is always 15. Those things are set. I'm not sure who determines that, but people who are kind of in charge of IQ testing, they determine that 100 is average and standard deviation is 15. So if that's the average, if you look at the numbers, what percent of scores are within one standard deviation? 68% fall within one standard deviation. If it's 15, you go 100 minus 15 is 85. 100 plus 15 is 115. So 68% of all people have IQ scores between 85 and 115. And if you remember, 95% of scores are within two standard deviations. So, or 90, depends on the textbook you look at, but it's roughly that. So if you added another 15 and went up to 130, and then if you subtracted another 15 going 85 to 70, we're saying that 96% of people fall, their IQ falls between 130 or between 70 and 130. And then the bottom 2% would be from 70 to 55, and the top two would be from 130 to 145. So what we're saying is only 2% of people have IQ scores that are below 70, and then you get into that, you're starting to look at like being, kind of having mental disability or, intelligence disability. And then above a 130, you're looking at like genius level IQ, which is a term I'm not, it's hard to define that, but on an IQ test, this would be a very high level of IQ. And again, they do renorm it periodically as the Flynn effect occurs to always keep that average at 100. So hopefully that didn't confuse you too much. I'm going to skip percentiles this year. So one key thing with test construction, you make sure you know about the idea of standardization. Now, when you think standardized test, you probably think, oh, we're going to like sit together in rows and we're all going to use a number 2 pencil and we're all going to take the same test and that kind of thing. That is part of it. But really the most important thing of standardization when it comes to a test, and you may not have known this, is that the questions have been used on a similar population. So when you take like Iowa test of, the ITEDs or whatever they have you guys take, they compare your performance to the performance of other people that have already taken it. It could be from kids from last year. It could be a cohort of students they've picked, whatever. But that's how they determine things like when they say, oh, you read at the 76th percentile, they're saying you score at or above 76% of the people that took this test. Or, if you take the ACT, that's a standardized test, and they say, oh, well, let's say you got a 25 or whatever. They might say like, oh, you're at the 75th percentile. So they're saying based on comparing it to people that have taken it before, you're scoring at or better than 75% of those people. So again, it's not just that people all took the same test. Now your AP test, if you decide to take the AP Psych test or any other AP test, you may not have known this, but they standardize those by comparing your score to, they give them to random college classes. And so how they determine that score of like, if you get a 5 on the AP test or a 4 or a 3 or whatever, if you get a 5, that means you've outperformed the students that got an A in intro to psych, like in colleges and universities throughout the country. And a 4, you outperformed students who got a B. So that's how they come up with that. There's an actual real formula there. Norms for tests, standardized tests are updated periodically, like we said. Things like the Flynn effect, populations change, they get smarter, times change. They also want to change tests to make sure that they're still valid and reliable. They might change wording in a question. Think about phrases that maybe have been used historically but are not used anymore. So I think about like my grandma. She's 85. She calls a couch a Davenport. So if you were going to have a question that referred to a Davenport, people in 2020 would be like, what the heck are you talking about? So they might update questions that way. They might take out certain questions. And you may not have known this, but you've all actually been part of a standardization sample, I'm guessing. So this is the group that they test the questions on. You've probably been a part of this with like ITEDs or other tests like that, but you've also been a part of this with like ACT if you've taken those. Sometimes they tell you this, like, hey, we're going to take this little test. We're not going to score it. It's not going to be part of your score, but these are for, standardization purposes. And so maybe you remember doing that. But sometimes they embed these into the tests themselves, and you don't even know about it. But they want to see how well people do on given questions, and that way when they administer that question later on, they can compare the performance of those students to your performance, and that's how they help generate those scores. Fascinating stuff, right? We're going to do some practice in class with this, but I'll kind of introduce the topic. So another key thing when it comes to test construction is reliability. This is referring to the consistency of a test. So like, are the scores similar if you take it repeatedly? So you don't want a test where like you take it one day and you get an A, and then the next day you take it and you get a C. Or think about if you had like two different English teachers look at one of your papers, would they give you the same grade here at Johnston High School? You would want to say yes. I'm often told by students that the answer is no, but that's not good. So how consistent is the scoring? So there's a few different types. There's split half reliability. If you split the test in half, literally first half, second half, do those scores correlate? Equivalent form reliability. So a lot of teachers use several different forms of a test. I do this sometimes too. There's a Form A, a Form B. You would not want to have a test where like people on Form A averaged a 95% and people in Form B averaged a 70%. That's a big that's a problem. That means there's something wrong with one of the forms of your test, or both, or whatever. So that would be a huge red flag. And then retest reliability. This is more for like aptitude type tests. So if I gave an aptitude test and you took it, and then you took it like 6 months later, how similar would your score be? And a lot of people don't like hearing this, but whether you like or dislike, ACTs and SATs, generally they have pretty high retest reliability, meaning it's not common for someone to take a test like an ACT and get like a 21, and then they take it again, they get like a 28. There's not generally going to be a huge uptick in scores. Now, if you take it as a junior and then as a senior, you could see some change, or maybe the first time you were super nervous and then you take it again, you're like, okay, now, there could be minor shifts of a few points, but, I've had students say, well, I got a 21 the first time. Do you think I can get a, 28 or a 30? And I'm like, probably not. I mean, anything's possible, but it's probably not statistically likely because those have pretty high retest reliability. And like I said, we're going to do an assignment on this one. Another one is, inter-rater reliability. So this would be like if two teachers scored your test, would they give it the same grade? So there's two raters looking at. So again, we're going to do some practice with this in class. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can read the slide if you want. But again, we'll address it in the assignment. And then validity is the accuracy of the test. Is the test measuring what it's supposed to measure? So I kind of use the analogy of like a scale that weighs you. If it has validity, it's accurate. Like if it says you weigh 150 pounds and you weigh 150 pounds, it's accurate. If you compare this to reliability, you could weigh 150 pounds, but it could sometimes weigh you at 160 and other times at 140. It's not very reliable. So you could on the flip side, it could reliably weigh you at 160, even though you only weigh 150. So the point is, you can have reliability, but not have validity. But if you have validity, you will have reliability. So you can have reliability without validity, but if you have validity, you'll have reliability. So there's several types of these, and again, in the assignment, we'll address them. Just a couple that are really the big ones. Content validity, we're looking at how well does a test measure the entire range of material. So if I gave you a final exam and the whole thing was like classical conditioning, it's not measuring the entire range of material. So you think about how many times maybe you've taken a test with a teacher and you're like, this is not what we emphasized in class. That makes a lot of students angry, and understandably so. So that test would lack content validity. Face validity is kind of the same thing, except think of it like at face value. So content validity would be like an expert in the field looking at a test and saying, oh, yes, this is good or this is bad. Face validity would be like a student saying, man, that test didn't seem like it measured what it was supposed to. So those are two good ones. And then another one that I'm just going to focus on here is predictive validity. So this is like an aptitude test, like it's trying to predict or forecast into the future how good you're going to be at something. So like PSATs try to predict success on the SAT or ACT. SAT and ACT scores are trying to predict college success. So how well it's able to do this. We'll talk a little bit more about why this can be tough, but when we get to class. I'm going to skip that one for now. The other thing I'll just wrap up with when we talk about intelligence tests and college entrance exams. Like I said, they are pretty reliable. So if you get a 21 on the ACT, you take it again. Most times it's not going to go up quite, because it's more of an aptitude test, not a knowledge test to some degree. They do not have terribly high predictive validity. So the correlation coefficient of ACT scores, or I think it was SAT scores, and college GPA, at last time I saw it, it was about a 0.3 correlation coefficient. That's not like worthless, but it's not that great either. Meaning there's lots of people who maybe don't score terribly well on the ACT, but they go on to do well in college. And then there's some that do really, it's the inverse. It goes the opposite way. They do really well on the ACT, and they don't do very well, or some people that don't do very well and then they do really well. So you think there's a lot of factors that could explain that, from work ethic to just all kinds of things. But bottom line, they don't have terribly good predictive validity. So the question becomes, if you were to not use them, which probably won't happen anytime soon because there's so much money in it, but if you were to eliminate them, what would you exchange them with? The difficulty, if you say, well, I'll just do grades. The problem is it's not very objective from school to school. Some schools, it's harder to get A's, and some schools it's harder to get B's. I've been told from students that come from other districts that, I have been in the past, that like, oh, this is harder than the place I came from, or, it could go the other way. But the point is, an A in Johnston may not mean the same thing as an A in Urbandale or in Norwalk or in Ankeny or at Des Moines Roosevelt, so that's kind of difficult too. So, it's easy to bash on these college entrance exams, and I'm not the biggest, cheerleader of them, but if you're going to get rid of them, you got to have something valid and reliable to replace them with that's better. So just, something to consider. This whole, as the population decreases, we can talk about that in class because that's kind of a complicated deal and people tend to need a little bit further explanation of it. I'll leave you with this. This is a correlation, a scatter plot of IQ scores and SAT scores. So some people say that, the SAT, all it is an IQ test. It's not really anything different. And this would lend a little bit of credence to that. So it just makes you wonder how different all these tests are and how valuable they are. So that's a good place to stop. So we'll see you in class, and thanks for listening.